to another episode of PM Radio Westminster. We have the pleasure today to host Dr. Richard Kirkham, one of the key researchers in Government Major Project Portfolio and part of the Project X team. Project X is a funded research collaboration between the UK government, academia and industry representatives, with an aim to bring and generate unique insights into the performance and the delivery of major infrastructure projects. We will be covering topics such as benefits realization and value for money of these important and key projects in any industry and in any sector. So we'll start with, welcome Richard, very nice to have you.
Nice to see you down here, thank you for the invitation today.
Thank you, and can you please start by introducing yourself to the audience? I've already done my best.
And you did a fantastic job too, Dan. You can speak perhaps better than I about Project X. So I'm Richard. I'm a reader in civil engineering in the Department of Mechanical Aerospace and Civil Engineering at the University of Manchester. And Daniel's one of my former PhD students, and it's a great honour to be able to come and join today, and also to talk about some of the really exciting work that we've been doing in Project X.
Yeah, I'm excited too. So we'll start with maybe a basic introductory question. What can you say about the difference between benefits and value?
Wow, that's not a basic introductory question. Okay. That is a very difficult question, where I wouldn't say there's a specific answer. Mm-hmm. It really depends, I think, on your kind of viewpoint as well, whether you're looking at this from an economics point of view, from an accountancy point of view, or perhaps from a more general project management perspective. My answer to that, and it's not the green book view of it, because that's a very tightly defined. Value is a proposition, so it's the way that we perceive an object or a service, and the utility perhaps that we derive from its existence. So often in my part of the world in Yorkshire, people will talk about value for money, but they'll be talking about something being cheap. Yeah. But we also know, of course, that some things that are cheap don't last particularly long. Yeah. So therefore, you might say, well, is that really value for money? So yeah, it's very much driven by individual beliefs, I would argue. Whereas benefits are much more tightly defined, I would say. So when we're building a business case for a project, we evaluate the costs of it, how much it costs to build or to design, and then we think about what benefits will be delivered by its existence to society. And in the work of government, there are 5 cases which the Green Book describes to help determine what benefits look like in an economic sense, perhaps in a social sense, and so forth. The government would also say that benefits are quantifiable. Okay. Yeah. So in order for it to be a benefit, you've got to be able to quantify its existence. But we also know, of course, that benefits in a more general sense in major projects can often be really quite difficult to measure or to quantify.
That would actually be my second question on how do we plan benefits and how do we quantify those who are not quantifiable in terms of better quality of life or maybe social benefits. So how accurate can we be in quantifying things that are not readily quantifiable?
Well, that's a really good question, Dania. I think that in the context of the work of government, the purpose of delivering projects is to achieve policy objectives. So when a policy is developed in government, often if it's attached to a bill that's progressing through Parliament, there'll be an impact statement, and that will set out some of the costs and the benefits that the policy is expected to deliver. A good example actually is the building safety legislation that's going through Parliament at the moment. Clearly there is a need for reform in the construction sector. There's a need to think about how housing the delivery of housing can be reformed to keep people safe. So the building safety bill has an impact statement attached to that, which sets out costs and benefits of a building safety regulator, having building safety managers in buildings, adjusting the legislation where appropriate to make sure that duty holders discharge their responsibilities, etc., etc. in terms of like planning benefits, which is I think where your main question is, there's quite a lot of guidance to help with that. In fact, the Infrastructure Projects Authority produced guidance, which was written by a civil servant who's now in the DfT, which was designed to help departments across Whitehall standardise the way that they quantify benefits and then report them in business cases and ultimately in the government's major project portfolio. More recent guidance has sought to move away from the focus on costs of projects to the long-term outcomes. So there's new guidance that the IPA and the Treasury have produced, which looks across different areas, including social benefits and such like. But it's difficult to be really kind of accurate about those long-term costs because we live in a very volatile society at the moment. The impact of the pandemic, for example, has shown that business cases for many projects and programmes no longer stack up. And we're now having to think about, how do we deal with that? So what we also do know from our research, though, is that the government, on the whole, but not always, but on the whole, is quite optimistic about the benefits. Okay. And there's been criticism in select committees and NEO reports about why is it that departments tend to be overly optimistic about benefits. And I think the reason often is to get it through the Treasury's business case approval. And if your benefits and cost ratio is too low, the Treasury will not give you money, and you can't get your project done.
Can we refer to an example, and I think it has been in the news for a while now, on High Speed 2. There was an argument around whether after the new normal is taking place now, many companies and organizations are converting into a hybrid way of working. So do we still need high-speed trains, since the first purpose or reason is to bring the north with the south, to make it easier to commute, to work, etc. So, and you've just mentioned that with the pandemic, the business case might change over time and would change over time. So how do we deal with the change in the business case? Now, if you relate to Prince2 methodology and to all these project management methodologies, they say check the business case and update it regularly. And if it's not sound anymore, stop the project. How can you apply this to something of a value of billions of pounds?
Well, I'm not sure Prince2 as a methodology is a particularly helpful one in the context of major infrastructure project delivery of the kind that High Speed 2 is. What I will say about High Speed 2 is when it first was conceived, it had almost a very kind of clear strategy and a set of strap lines, very similar to what Mintzberg and Quinn would argue in their theory of strategy. So capacity, increasing capacity was one of the drivers. Kind of redistribution of wealth was another, and journey time savings, because they are monetizable in the way the DfT looks at things. And the overall view was engine for growth. That was the strategy. But they dropped that.
Okay.
And then we started to see those strategy drivers change as well. And on the journey time saving issue, which received a lot of scrutiny, I was quite fascinated by that, because I travel down to London from York regularly, and I can do that journey in 1 hour 45 minutes fast if it's non-stop. So I can get a lot of work done in that period of time. So if I was to have a shorter journey, I doubt I'd actually do any work on the journey. I'd probably read the football magazine or the newspaper or whatever. So I was never necessarily bought into the idea that faster journey times in themselves were going to deliver benefits, particularly around working. But what I did buy into was the idea that if we as a country commit to big infrastructure investments, then there are other benefits that kind of come out of that, around creating the need for supply chains to provide the materials and the services and the products that will enable the railway to be built. And once you've kind of got that pipeline of work in place, that gives confidence to the sector to invest in training, in education, in skills. And back in my world at Manchester, teaching civil engineering students, I want to get them inspired. I want them to be able to spend 4 years at Manchester, learn the technical mastery of civil engineering, and then go out into the real world and build things that improve our society. But if there aren't any projects for them to work on, how do we inspire them? How do we, generate that next generation of civil engineers? So there is a huge amount of value in just doing these things, because it creates so many emergent benefits. And I do recall a discussion on this a fair few years ago now, involving Penny Mordaunt, who was then Secretary of State for the Ministry of Defence, and she was having a bit of a pop at the Treasury and criticising the Green Book approach to the evaluation of benefits in the defence world, because submarines in Barrow, aircraft wings in Filton in Bristol, they create supply chains and demand for skills which hopefully lead to stronger economies, greater social value, and a more prosperous society. But we don't often capture that. And definitely, if anyone's been up to Barrow, you'll see that so many people in Cumbria are either working on submarines, or further up the coast in Sellafield, they'll be working on nuclear decommissioning. So these big kind of projects and programs, they often sustain economies, and that's really important, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Regarding this, how do you respond to the saying, build it and they will come? Do you agree that infrastructure projects will always have benefits and value, no matter what? So we have to build them, even if the current evidence doesn't suggest big numbers, like when you do benefits cost analysis, if the numbers are not really convincing. Do you agree with this, build it and they will come?
I do recall Pete Waterman, the music mogul, saying that in a documentary many years ago. I think he said, if you are investing in railway projects, the evidence in history shows that they've always been generally successful in delivering long-term benefits for society. And absolutely, if you look at our network at the moment, the Victorian legacy there is clear to see. So yes, I do generally believe in that. But then what you also need to be kind of mindful of is that not everybody in the country uses trains.
Yeah.
So there's this need, I think, to make sure that when we decide across the whole government spending where the priorities are going to be, that we ensure that those people that won't benefit from a railway will benefit from some other form of investment elsewhere. People who, are coming towards their retirement, people who don't work because they've got caring responsibilities, they want to see transformational change in social care. So that whole programme of government spending is crucial to them. They don't care about fast trains to London. So real options appraisal of government spending decisions is important. And that's the whole purpose of a spending review. So, in the whole, government looks across all of its spending portfolio and says, right, have we got the right balance? But I also think it's important in a democracy that if the government says we're going to build something and then they get elected, that they should be supported by the civil service to deliver that. Because if you don't, then I think that has consequences for democracy. So a government should be empowered to deliver on its priorities. So this is why project delivery is so important and is the second largest profession now in government in terms of headcount. It is the mechanism by which almost the democratic mandate is enacted. But what we also need to be better at, I think, is then saying, okay, we've got a policy, we're going to go and deliver that policy through a project or a programme. We've then got to make sure that we're tracking the benefits into operations and that we're driving out as many benefits as we can. Because I think there's a tendency to think, okay, project's done, SRO moves off to something else, and we don't worry about it anymore. We're focusing on the next business case.
It happens, and I wanted to share a little story from my own home country as well. I come from the Middle East, and I remember one of the biggest projects in the capital city was initiated by a statement by the mayor saying the city deserves a metro. So, and that said, that was the trigger, that was the green light needed prior to any feasibility study or any business case or any analysis. That was what drove the decision, the project itself. And then it felt like, they had to do a business case just for the sake of documenting it in the books and and making it official. But the main decision was really triggered by something like the city deserves a metro, or the people need this project, or without an actual analysis. So I think I would agree with you that some infrastructure projects, I think the benefits come from their mere existence, so you need them anyway, especially when you consider the growth in population. But then comes the question of, isn't there a better area to spend money on? And this is when all this analysis, I think, comes in, and it has to be for the mere purpose of, validating our decision that spending in this area is justifiable.
Yeah. I think it's a great example you gave, because that is quite common across the Middle East. There's a criticism that here in the UK we just spend too much time talking about things rather than doing it. But that reflects to some extent the complexity of our democracy now. So when you're trying to build something on the scale of High Speed 2 or Crossrail, there's a whole landscape of legislation that needs to be, complied with to be able to get to put a spade in the ground. Planning legislation, for example, and it's widely reported in the press that a huge amount of money had been spent on legal fees to enable the bill to progress through Parliament that created High Speed 2. But I think that, just to kind of finish on that High Speed 2 story, I think the real tragedy of that decision that Leeds will not get connected to the network, it reflects a broader problem in that part of the world with decision inertia. Leeds is a very prosperous city, the biggest city, I think, probably in Europe, that doesn't have its own properly integrated transport system, and there was the hope that High Speed 2 would create the catalyst for that to happen. And now that that's not going to be the case, questions do really have to be asked about whether the business case now really does stack up, because my suspicions, and I don't have the evidence yet, but I think my suspicions are that the business case for High Speed 2 in its original form was very much dependent on connecting Manchester and then Leeds and York to Birmingham, and then onwards to London. But it'll be interesting to see now whether the money that has been notionally saved by rescoping High Speed 2 will be channelled into other projects and programmes that deliver benefits for the north of England.
Yes, well, we'll see. Now, can you tell us a little bit, you've done a lot of research as part of Project X and as part of being academic at the University of Manchester. What kind of, do you recall any success stories in terms of infrastructure project delivery? Because the impression is that they are always over, they are delayed and they are over budget. So it would be nice to hear some sort of, at least one example where the project was delivered on time, delivered the benefits planned. So anything comes to mind?
I think most infrastructure projects go over time or over cost because the original estimates were wrong.
Okay.
And this is this preoccupation with deterministic views of projects. That might be that the general public demand to know how much something will cost, and they don't want uncertainty and they don't want risk. They just want to know how much something will cost, in the same way they want to know how much the house is that they want to buy or the car that they want to buy. So we build in failure right from the beginning by not being honest about envelopes of cost. So if we can start to move the conversation away from saying this program will cost X to this project will cost somewhere between X and Y, and we can say that with a certain degree of confidence, then I think that you set infrastructure projects up for greater chance of success. But the probability of an infrastructure project or programme coming in at X is zero, because we know that despite all the best endeavours, the landscape in which the programme is situated is constantly changing. We're in 5-year parliamentary cycles in this country, which means that a change of government can completely change the existence of a project or programme. And that's the other thing I think that's really important to mention, is that you can build a business case for a programme, a project, get that through the Treasury, get into action, and then you have an election and new policies come out, or you have a complete change of administration politically, and they say, we're no longer interested in this. So there are many brilliant examples in Network Rail of delivered on time, on cost infrastructure projects. And I would definitely recommend your listeners to have a look on Network Rail's website to see some of those examples, and some of them delivered in exceptionally challenging situations, such as the renewals works that was done down in the southwest of England near Penzance following those storms that damaged the railway. That railway line was right close to the sea at Dawlish Warren, so great work that was done there. And Network Rail engineers in particular work extremely hard in kind of post-storm scenarios of the kind we've just experienced in the UK. But because they're successful, they don't really get the news.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
People
it's
don't.
Only bad news that make news.
It's only bad news. It's bad news that sells newspapers. And I think this is a job for the government. It's got to be better, I think, at promoting the good stuff that it does. And it's not just the infrastructure. So there's loads of brilliant examples across government of successful project delivery. And to be fair to the NAO, they do highlight that in their reports. Great examples that spring to my mind are digital transformation in the Home Office around passports. So the programme director for that, she's excellent. And renewing your passport, renewing your driving licence, that kind of stuff. It's really easy now, isn't it? Gov.uk. And there's not many countries that offer that level of simplicity. So that's been really, really good. Universal Credit is a very controversial programme, primarily because of the policy that initiated it. The civil servant that leads that is Neil Cooling, and he's been in that post for quite a long time now. And he faces a lot of criticism because actually the policy itself is controversial, but he's got the job of delivering IT infrastructure that will enable the policy objective to be achieved, and motivating a workforce to work within that level of scrutiny and criticism. It's really, really hard. And in this country, we're just brilliant at complaining about the government. It's the criticism of the work of the state is one of the real strengths of this democracy. And but that creates challenges, doesn't it, for those that are working within that environment?
Definitely. So good examples there. It's always nice to, but as you said, they don't make the same noise as bad examples. I think you touched on a very important point, which is we start with wrong estimates, very optimistic estimates, maybe just for the sake of convincing people to do the project. And maybe at this point, we should stop defining project success in terms of whether we finished on time within budget. We should always look at broader definitions, especially when it comes to benefits. So have we achieved the benefits? Did we manage to make the impact that we wanted? Would you agree that the project management definition of project success must really very soon steer away from the finishing on time within budget?
I think that's a really, really good point. As a Manchester graduate yourself, you're aware that much of that work that was done around the Iron Triangle started in the University of Manchester. But I think there is a conversation that needs to be had about understanding project performance as distinct from project success, because they are, in my view, different things. But to give you an example of that, your listeners are maybe aware of an ongoing legal case at the moment involving the Post Office and the Horizon system that was developed by Fujitsu to enable transactions to be recorded in post office branches across the UK. When that project was delivered, I say it's a program actually, when the program was delivered, Fujitsu's own literature had lauded the fact that it was delivered on time and on budget, and that it was at the time the largest IT transformation program in Europe. Fast forward to today, there is ongoing cases going through courts to quash convictions that were secured against people working in the post office who were accused of false accounting or theft because the Horizon system was not reporting correct transactions. So what started off as being viewed as a very successful program may now turn out to be responsible for some of the largest miscarriages of justice in British legal history. And as I say, that's going through the courts at the moment, and we'll see where that goes to. But what we do know is that program has led to people going to prison when they've done nothing wrong. So for those reasons alone, and that particular case, I would welcome a conversation about how we move away from very simplistic views of projects.
Definitely. Programs. Okay, so Richard, I think for our final question, I'd like you to, since you worked on Project X, if you can briefly mention the top 3 findings from your work, even if it's not related to benefits realization specific. What have come out of your research in terms of new insights into infrastructure delivery?
Sort of a hard question, Daria. I don't know if I can pick out 3 because there's quite a few. What I would suggest to your listeners, by the way, is if you have a look at our Project X website, which is www.bettergovprojects.com, there is a section on parliamentary engagement where you will see our evidence submissions to the Public Accounts Committee and to the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee on major projects in government. So in those evidence submissions, there is plenty of stuff in there that summarises what we've learned and what we think are priorities for research in this area going forward. Definitely one of the issues is about this notion of asynchronicity of kind of policy development and projects and programme delivery. So you can create a policy that initiates a project or programme, the programme goes into execute, but then the policy landscape changes. And if that happens, that potentially then leads to a need to revisit the business case and say, is what we are doing now still likely to deliver the benefits in the context of a changing policy landscape? And you know that from your PhD research that you did, that's a big issue. So that's one thing. We talked about benefits today. Yes, we need to be taking a more sophisticated look at benefits. So I really welcomed the work that was done by IPA on that a fair few years ago now. But we definitely need to support civil service, particularly in using new tools and techniques that help us appreciate the sophistication of projects and programs, and therefore how we begin to quantify the benefits. There's been legislation that's passed recently which is about driving out social value. The Social Value Act, as it's often referred to, is one example, but societies are really complex, and we can't look at that level of complexity with very simple methods. So that's definitely one thing. I think on assurance and governance, which is a really important part of holding government to account in how it spends money on projects and programmes, that looks to be going in the right direction. And we published a paper this year in the International Journal of Managing Projects and Business on assurance and governance in the GMPP. The idea of making sure that process becomes not just a way of holding government to account for its spending on major projects, but it's also an encouraging way of supporting project professionals in delivering really challenging work is is important. But I mean, what we also know about that is that Crossrail was given quite optimistic estimates of delivery confidence, and then suddenly we realised that there was a big problem there. So yeah, there's a bit of work I think needs to be done around there as well. And what else would I say? So I think generally around recognising the really unique skills that project managers, programme directors and so forth need to acquire to deliver successful projects, the whole kind of leadership and capability stuff. And finally, I think, and this is for, isn't it, transformation is something I think that we're still trying getting our heads around a bit, because transformation accounts for a big, proportion of the government's major project portfolio, but transformation projects and programmes are predicated on behaviour change. So we've got to be better in the business case at understanding what that behaviour change looks like, how we're going to support it, both in terms of the way the civil service works and how citizens react to those services, and then to make sure that we can capture those benefits. But we've seen situations where the scale of the transformation has been so great that it's not been deliverable, and programmes have been kind of rescoped or moved out of that part of the portfolio to somewhere else to make the delivery confidence more acceptable.
Yeah, thank you for these 3 very important findings. I think I've asked all my questions, and any final comments you'd like to add, Richard, before?
No, the only thing I would say is it's been a huge pleasure really working and still working with my colleagues in Project X. Been really grateful to the Economic and Social Research Council for their funding, to the APM, the PMI, who've also been, fantastic advocates. And what I really do hope to see in the future is, an increasing recognition in universities of the importance of project studies, because this is still a big challenge in my view. There are some opinions in universities that see this discipline as not traditional and therefore lacking in the academic rigour that you would perhaps argue exists in more historically traditional areas of study. But let's not make any mistake here. Successful projects and programme delivery is key to a successful and flourishing democracy. It's a big source of income to higher education institutions across the UK. There's a huge enthusiasm for it, and I really do hope that in the future the funding bodies significantly increase their funding in this, because there's a very clear impact and benefit to society if we can get even better at delivering major projects and programmes.
I agree. Thank you very much, Richard. Very great examples and good insights into an area that probably most of our listeners haven't come across. And we will be also posting all the links that you referred to under or below the video once it's uploaded. Thanks again. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and it's nice to see you here in London again. Thank you very much, and have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you, Danny. It's been a pleasure.